Hello, fellow travelers. This is Krotnip, welcoming you all back to the logbook of a simple Lindworm traveler. This is finally going to be my long-delayed first episode in the series Forces of the Scions of Yaldabaoth, and today we are going to be taking a look at the faction's basic infantry unit, the Intact. So, who are the Intact? The Scions of Yaldabaoth tend to form these secret societies they call families around the progenitor who's leading them. And in this very dysfunctional family, so to speak, the lowest rung of servants are the Intact. And the term is used here in a negative way, in a derogatory sense, to convey the fact that these servants have not yet been deemed worthwhile by their master to be modified by their arts of transforming the flesh of themselves or their servants. So they see themselves as lesser members of the cult. But at the same time, the Intact do actually serve a rather crucial function within this society, since due to the exact fact that they lack any body modifications, they can slip in and out of the human society surrounding the family, and thus they can act as the progenitor's agents in the human society with little fear of discovery. And they are, for example, tasked with obtaining resources and knowledge that would be hard for others to come by, and they are also often required for recruiting additional members to the cult. When combat calls, the Intact serve their masters by adorning themselves with parts of slain enemies, bodies of animals, and other weird looking, scary looking bits and pieces, and they take care to mask themselves as to hide their identities. These monstrous appearances that they take upon themselves are a reflection of the monster that they hope to become one day, should the progenitor see them as worthy of such modification, while the progenitors themselves see this crude mimicking of their abilities as a tribute to the terrible, dark-minded elf that leads the group. The Intact are described in the backstory as forsaken people who serve their masters with joy and fierce loyalty, even though there seems to be hints in, for example, the Warcrow Adventures game that not all Intact are actually fully in with what the family is trying to achieve, and some may try to leave their family at some point. Here we have the card for the Intact in Warcrow, the wargame. Huge thanks to Tikbalang and everyone else making sure that the fan-built Warcrow army builder is kept working and updated. Their pictures make work like this possible, since there is no high-quality PDFs available for these cards from Corvuspelli as of right now, at least that I know of. So I'll be using a lot of cards pulled from the Warcrow army builder online version for the cards about the Scions of Yaldabaoth going forward. As we can see, the Intact are of a medium cost. 25 points isn't all that much in a game of Warcrow, but it is a tad higher than the cost of some of the other basic infantries we have come up with so far. For example, the Orc Hunters or the Bucklermen of Hegemony. The intact are also rather slow moving. They unfortunately combine the worst characteristics of the two basic infantry units just mentioned. They are impaired by the slow quote-unquote travel speed of the Orc Hunters, that is a standard movement of 3-2, and the lackluster charge distance of the Bucklermen of 9 strides. So the intact aren't the most fleet of foot troops when they are positioning around the battlefield, and they can't realistically expect to outrange their enemies with their moderate charge distance. So they more often than not are expected to be on the receiving end of enemy attacks, first strikes, rather than the other way around. The unit is made up of 4 models, and each model has 2 wounds, so very basic infantry-ish stats in this regard. Interestingly enough, the intact's willpower is not the single orange dice that we often find with the basic infantry units, but rather it's a double yellow dice. And I did the math, and actually this double yellow is worse than a single orange dice at achieving a single success. But at the same time, it is a dice roll that technically has the possibility of achieving double success. That's impossible for single orange dice willpower units to do. So you win some, lose some. Mostly in this case, you lose some. The morale value of 1 puts the intact in the category of weak morale units, which will impair their ability to activate several times in a round because they can't handle all that much stress. There has been an errata published saying that the intact should be availability 1, but I question whether this is going to hold going forward when we get the full release of Scions of Yaldabaoth. It does feel rather odd to have only availability 1 for a basic infantry unit. And I don't see the intact as being so powerful that spamming them would be a strategy that Corvuspelli needs to be worried about, and this low availability might be more due to the fact that you don't have enough models for 2 units in the Warcrow Adventures box that the original models that I'm also using on this presentation were supplied with. So expect changes on that going forward is my guess. The intact's keywords include human infantry and living flesh, and these are combinations that don't actually grant the intact any additional abilities per se, but rather they are the types of keywords that combine with other abilities, denote the types of characters that can join the unit and so forth. So nothing of importance as of right now. The intact have the basic conquest value of 1, and the nice thing is that even though this conquest value isn't all that high, it is consistent. So even after suffering half or more than half casualties, the intact will still be supplying the Scions forces with a Conquest 1 unit, and if and when you choose to attach a character that boosts this value, then you are looking at least Conquest 2 basic infantry unit, which is fine. Not great, not terrible, fine. And this leads us nicely, when talking about fine but not terrible and not great, to the attack breakdown of the intact. As you can see from the attack roll, the full power intact attack close to the hitting power of a Orc Hunters unit with their access to a single red dice and 3 orange dice. This will on average give them 3 successes on their attack, and they have the ability to achieve as many as 5. When the unit drops to half or less models, then you lose all the orange dice and you get just 2 yellow dice in their stead, which drastically reduces the unit's expected damage output, or drastically, well, it drops down to less than 2 effectively, and the maximum is at 4, but you are unlikely to go that high since the yellow dice are so unreliable at producing solid successes. The orange dice are the best dice for achieving hollow specials, and this is important because the intact have a single hollow special switch that allows them to inflict the frightened state upon the target of their attack. It's still possible to achieve this result with the yellow dice of their weaker attack profile, but it's way more unlikely, so don't bank on that. The intact are capable of producing some hollow successes. Actually, the average number goes up when the unit takes casualties, and they are also rather adept at providing solid special symbols, even though unfortunately the intacts themselves lack a innate switch ability to trigger with these specials, so keep your eye out for attachable characters that could allow the intact to make good use of these symbols. Before going on to the defensive metrics of the intact, let's take a look at a couple of abilities that have an effect on the attack roll that the intact will be producing. And the first, I'm going to struggle with the pronunciation of this one, is called Blades of Cathrador. This is a command skill, so you need to be using this one sparingly, since it's going to eat into your command point pool, and it would seem that the Scions have access to some quite powerful command skills, so don't go overboard. But anyway, Blades of Cathrador is usable only once per round for the unit making use of it. There are others also in the faction when performing a melee attack. And what this ability effectively does is that it stops the defending unit from cancelling your successes with their solid block symbols, and instead the defender can only block your successes with hollow blocks. And this is a potentially powerful ability that can make mockery of some of the stronger defenses out there. Automatic blocks, blocks gained from push modifiers or switch abilities or high defense rolls are all null when it comes to defending against an attack by a humble intact unit if you are willing to spend a command token to make it so. So units like Bucklermen joined by, let's say, Drago, or a Corporal for that matter, your Orc Battle Scarred with their Wise Mane and so forth. These are the types of units that should feel a bit anxious when there are intact nearby looking to attack them, since the 25-point unit can cause disproportionate casualties against such elite units. At the same time, this is not a world beater of a ability. If the defending unit is rolling any black dice, this ability effectively has no effect on those, since the black dice has exactly the same likelihood of producing a solid block and a hollow block, so the effect is a wash. And also, if the opponent has abilities that allow them to reduce the total amount of wounds that they are suffering, for example, a hegemony unit joined by the War Surgeon, then the power of this ability is greatly reduced, and you might have to think twice whether spending the command token is going to be worth what you will be getting. The second ability that enhances just the attack roll of the intact is called Exalted by Blood. This is a passive skill that becomes available once the unit's total number of models characters included falls below 4, so a single casualty when there are no characters attached and 2 casualties if there are. And this simply triggers the Bloodlust keyword on the intact. And for those who may not remember or know, Bloodlust means that the unit that has the keyword and manages a charge can access the charge attack reroll on all the subsequent rounds of combat as long as the combat lasts. But at the same time, if they choose to activate and there is an enemy unit within charge distance of them, they must pass a willpower test or charge an enemy unit regardless of what you were actually hoping to do. And here's where the weak double yellow willpower actually comes up. Then again, if you are activating the intact with enemies at close proximity, you are probably going to be charging most of the time anyway, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. But keep that in mind, it can, in a desperate situation, end up pulling the intact out of position, or maybe even this Bloodlust might stop them with a failed willpower test from capturing a undefended objective or something other important. So this is a nifty enough ability, but there are quite some hoops that you need to jump through in order to get mileage out of it. First, you need to have suffered casualties and still have enough members in the unit and enough targets available that you want to attack with them. You want to spend an activation on the intact. Then you need to be able to get the charge off despite your weak charge distance stat. And then you need to be activating the intact yet again on a subsequent round in order to actually access the benefit of the Bloodlust. So yeah, nice I suppose. But to be totally honest, if I was if I had a unit and I could choose whether to have this ability or have it removed and have some points cost reduction, I don't think I would be crying after this ability. But at the same time, I have to say this is very fluffy. This is very very good regarding the background of the unit, and all these things, all these special abilities combined give the intact a really nice and distinct feel, even though raw stats wise there isn't much that's truly unique here on this card. So kudos to CP once again. Speaking of things that we have seen before, let's talk about the defense role of the intact. As you can see, the orc hunterish nature of the unit comes to the fore here yet again, as their defense role consists of a single green dice and 2 black dice. This is a unreliable defense roll that on average only provides the intact with a single block symbol, but at the same time it can be greatly swingy, and getting 3 or even 4 blocks is not outside the realm of possibility, especially if you manage to roll that double block on the green dice to start off your roll. And there are also ways to make this roll more reliable, as we are about to see. The really bad thing, however, is the fact that this defense roll turns really abysmal after the intact fall to half strength or below, since they fall down to just a single blue dice, which is pretty catastrophic. And after this, any reasonable attack targeted at the unit will wipe the remainder of them out, and this can actually become quite a problem if you have a character attached to them, and then the damage from the enemy unit's attack will overflow and potentially wipe out your character, who as a solo model might have been able to shrug off at least some of the damage. So there's something to keep in mind. Unlike the orc hunters, the intact also lack any natural defensive switches. where the orc hunters can trade their blocks for damage if they so choose. The intact are not so lucky, nor do they have any ability to make use of any of the other symbols either to, for example, enforce states or maybe add additional damage mitigation to their roll. So the on average 2 and maximum 5 specials on their full roll, again, which is quite good, is wasted because there's no innate ability to make use of such symbols. And the greatly lesser amounts of hollow symbols that the unit is producing also go to waste unless some character is attached to them so that they can make use of these. Do note, however, also that the blue dice defense is going to bite you if you ever have to wield it. If you choose to attach a character to the unit to make use, that can allow you to make use of these additional symbols beyond blocks, since the single blue dice is so abysmal at producing any meaningful quantities of any other symbols also. So a intact unit at less than half strength is really pretty much dead in the water in my eyes in most cases. This leads us to the last passive ability of the intact, and this is a pretty cool and backstory wise very appropriate one, and it's called Loyal Until the End. This is a passive skill that's capped for use once per round, and it's usable if a high command character has joined the intact unit or they are as a solo model within 10 strides of the unit. And note that it has to be a high command character. You can't use an officer character who's the leader of your company for this. It has to be a high command character. And this comes down to the backstory. All the high command characters minus Nuada that have been released so far are progenitors, that is the masters of the family. So the intact are supposed to be fighting all the more fiercely when their dark god, their dark master is near them, so that they can hopefully impress their lord and be accepted into the ranks of the modified individuals of the group later on. What this ability actually does in the case of the intact is that it will allow them to reroll a single dice from their attack or defense roll. A single dice reroll isn't all that great, granted, but with the intact attack there is that red dice, and if you fail to roll any successes on that, you get quite a high value usually on your reroll, since you should go up from 0 to 1 or potentially even 2 unless you are really unlucky. And the same goes to a lesser extent for the green dice. You can go fishing for that double block there, and if you manage to roll well or decently enough on those best dice, then you can use this reroll on one of the lesser dice, orange, yellow, or maybe black on the defense. And this means that the intact should be slightly more reliable at reaching decent or good, even good attack and defense rolls, even though you do have to remember that 10 strides is actually quite a short distance in these aura type effects in Warcrow. You really do need to either have your high command with the intact, or you need to have them quite close enough, almost adjacent to the unit when the intact start moving, for example, in order to access this ability, which can lead to the Scions having to bunch up their forces in a way that might not be optimal in other circumstances. And then again, you can choose to forego using this ability altogether, but you are then paying for quite a few things that you can't make effective use of if, for example, Exalted by Blood doesn't come up, and or you are unable or unwilling to access Blades of Cathrador. Alright, that leads us nicely to the end analysis. The Intact are a medium cost basic infantry unit of the Scions forces, so when analyzing them, when fielding them, don't expect world beaters but rather solid workhorses that can do good work if you set them up for success. I really like the fact that while the Intact lacked the durability and high conquest value of the Bucklermen, the ranged attack capability and the maneuverability of the Guardians of the Forest and the sheer charge range and brutal offensive damage output of the Orc Hunters, they can still compensate for all these shortfalls by accessing their decent basic stat lines and their tricksy combination of abilities. Exalted by blood and loyal until the end can in fact allow the Intact to attack and to a lesser extent defend more competently than one would expect taking a quick glance at the unit card thanks to the rerolls involved, if you are able to find a way to trigger these abilities, which might actually not always be the case, and there might be cases where it's more detrimental for you to try and jump through all the hoops to actually access these abilities rather than just play the unit without them effectively. The moneymaker here obviously is Blades of Khadrador that can allow the Intact to inflict quite meaningful damage against high value enemy units that aren't traditionally threatened by basic infantry units such as these. So that is a interesting piece of the puzzle that I think Scions players should be on the lookout for, and the opponents of the Scions should also keep their eye on. I think that the Intact could be a valuable addition to a company of Scions of Yaldabaoth regardless of the type of list that the Scions player is constructing, not least because of the lack of other several model units in this points category as of right now at least. Although obviously there is going to be builds and situations where this unit is going to shine brighter than in others. And as primarily not a Scions player, I'm really interested to see when and how the Intact are going to be cropping up on the field of battle going forward. Okay, this one is now in the books. Hope that you have enjoyed the first unit analysis on the Scions of Yaldabaoth and hope to see you again very soon. Have a good one, fellow travelers.